In less than 60 seconds, a Russian landing boat near Kherson was erased from the battlefield, along with the troops and supplies it carried, by a Ukrainian UAV flying so high that no one on the ground ever saw it coming. There was no heavy artillery barrage and no close-range firefight. One precise strike ended the mission before it truly began, leaving only wreckage at the river's edge. The incident unfolded along the Kherson riverbank, an area where Russian forces have continued to rely on small boats to move men and material through contested waters. These crossings may look minor on a map, yet in a front line that has barely shifted for months, even a single successful landing can change local balance and open new pressure points. If a landing succeeds in this area, it can secure a supply route, support follow-on operations, and threaten control of an entire river corridor. If it fails, everything is lost at once, with no second chance to recover men, equipment, or momentum. That is what makes this strike stand out. A system operated far from the front turned a routine movement into a complete failure, without exposing Ukrainian forces to direct risk. This moment captures how today's wars are changing. The real question is no longer why the boat was small, but why trained troops were still vulnerable in an age where the sky is never truly empty, even when it looks calm. Control of the fight is decided early when one side can see movement before it turns into action, and this moment around Kherson shows how modern battles now start long before the first strike. A Ukrainian reconnaissance UAV was operating at high altitude over the river zone, holding a steady watch on a small Russian transport boat moving toward the shoreline. From that height, the drone did not rush or adjust position because its role was not to attack, but to confirm intent, direction, and timing while staying outside any immediate threat. Using combined optical and thermal sensors, the UAV quickly confirmed that the boat was carrying several soldiers along with supplies, which pointed to a landing or resupply task rather than random travel. Heat signatures showed clustered bodies and equipment packed close together, which meant the vessel was fully loaded and operating with limited space to maneuver if trouble appeared. This detail mattered because a crowded platform reduces reaction options once contact begins, and it turns even a small craft into a high-value target. The soldiers on board remained grouped in the open, with no visible effort to break up their outline or reduce detection, and no signs of aerial lookout or counter-drone awareness. At this level, the absence of air security suggested that UAVs were still not treated as an immediate danger at the squad level, despite their growing role across the battlefield. From above, the scene looked calm, but that calm was misleading, because every second of uninterrupted observation added clarity to the Ukrainian decision process. In modern warfare, a target that carries manpower and supplies at the same time already carries extra weight, and when that target pauses or slows on open water, its risk multiplies. Water offers no cover from above, and movement across it creates contrast that sensors can track with ease, which means exposure increases rather than decreases during approach. Even though the boat itself was small, its function made it valuable, because losing it would remove both people and the resources meant to sustain further action on shore. At this stage, no weapons were fired and no drones were launched, yet the balance had already shifted because information advantage had replaced surprise. The Ukrainian side could choose when to act, where to act, or whether to act at all, while the Russian unit moved forward without knowing it was already being measured. This gap in awareness defined the rest of the encounter because initiative now rested with the observer rather than the mover. Every adjustment of speed, every minor change in course, and every pause near the bank was recorded and interpreted in real time. What might have looked like a routine river crossing from the deck of the boat had already become a controlled situation from the air. By the time the UAV finished confirming numbers and behavior, the engagement window was clearly set, even though no strike asset had entered the scene. This is how many modern engagements now begin, not with contact, but with certainty, as control over tempo is gained through persistent observation. Before any FPV drone was launched, Ukraine had already shaped the fight, because seeing first meant deciding first, and deciding first meant owning the next step. The engagement shifts from observation to action the moment Ukraine decides to remove the platform rather than chase individual soldiers, because disabling movement is faster than targeting people one by one. Once the assessment phase is complete, an FPV drone is launched toward the transport boat with a clear task, which is to end the mission by breaking the vessel's ability to move. The approach is direct and controlled because the operator already knows the boat's speed, heading, and load, and that knowledge removes the need for hesitation. The impact hits the craft in a way that immediately disrupts propulsion and balance, and within seconds it becomes clear that the boat can no longer continue toward shore. This moment changes the logic of survival for everyone on board, because the platform that was meant to carry them now draws danger instead of offering protection. Surviving soldiers jump into the water not as a tactical choice, but as a reflex, which shows how quickly a transport asset can turn into a liability under aerial attack. From above, the shift is obvious, as bodies separate from the boat and movement becomes slower and less coordinated, which further limits options. As the soldiers swim away, a second small boat moves in to collect them, and this creates a new focal point that is just as exposed as the first. The FPV operator does not need to search again because continuous tracking keeps the new vessel within the same engagement window. A follow-on strike hits the second boat, and control is lost almost immediately, which confirms that the threat is not limited to a single platform. At this stage, the situation is no longer about escape, because each attempt to regroup produces another fixed point that can be targeted. The damaged boat drifts into reeds along the shoreline, where it becomes stuck, and this removes the last chance to leave the area by water. FPV drones carrying explosive payloads move in again, and their attacks focus on the immobilized craft, ensuring that no remaining capacity can be restored. The strikes are precise and deliberate, because the goal is not spectacle, but certainty, and the result is the complete removal of the platform from the fight. UAV camera footage confirms total destruction, with the hull broken and equipment scattered, which marks the end of any transport-based withdrawal. From that point onward, the battlefield narrows, because movement by boat is no longer possible, and every survivor is forced into slower options. The key effect of this sequence is not just physical damage, but the collapse of the original plan, since resupply or landing cannot proceed without the vessel. What stands out is how quickly control shifts once mobility is lost, because speed and distance disappear at the same time. The FPV strikes do not need volume to succeed, since each hit removes a layer of choice, and fewer choices mean higher exposure. By focusing on platforms instead of individuals, Ukraine compresses the timeline of the engagement, turning minutes into seconds. This phase shows how modern attacks prioritize denial over pursuit, as stopping movement proves more decisive than chasing targets across open water. When the boats are gone, the fight enters a new phase, because escape routes close and the remaining actions unfold under constant pressure. The fight reaches its most personal stage when the remaining soldiers are forced to rely only on their own bodies, because once the boats are gone, survival depends on speed, judgment, and luck. Some Russian soldiers try to swim toward the shore, believing that water will hide them. Yet under constant aerial watch, movement on the surface becomes easier to see, rather than harder. From above, each stroke creates a clear pattern, and body heat stands out against the cooler water, which removes any sense of concealment. What looks like escape at eye level turns into exposure from the air, because there is no terrain to break the outline or slow detection. FPV drones operated by elite Ukrainian units move in next, and their cameras capture moments of panic as soldiers realize they are being tracked even while swimming. The reactions are instinctive rather than planned, with sudden changes of direction, brief pauses, and uneven movement that only sharpen visibility instead of reducing it. Once some soldiers reach the shore, the danger does not fade, because the open bank offers little cover and forces quick decisions under stress. Several attempt to run, others drop flat, and a few freeze in place, hoping stillness will make them disappear, yet aerial sensors continue to follow every shift. In multiple cases, soldiers try to hide beneath trees or press into low bushes, but thin cover fails to block overhead observation. From the drone's view, branches and leaves do not erase heat or shape, which means these spots provide comfort without protection. Some soldiers attempt to play dead, remaining motionless on the ground, yet the camera angle reveals breathing, small movements, or changes in posture that give them away. These moments show how natural instincts clash with a battlefield shaped by machines, where human behavior is predictable once fear takes hold. The key change here is not the weapon itself, but the loss of any safe response, because every option available leads to the same outcome. FPV drones do not rush these engagements, since time favors the observer, and patience allows the operator to wait for a clear approach. Strikes arrive after hesitation sets in, not during movement, because stillness creates a fixed point that is easier to hit. At this stage, the battlefield feels compressed, as distance shrinks and reaction time collapses to seconds. Psychological pressure builds quickly, because soldiers understand they are seen, even when they cannot see the threat in return. This awareness breaks coordination, since shouting, signaling, or grouping together only increases risk under constant watch. Individual survival replaces unit discipline, and that shift removes any chance of organized defense or counteraction. The drones do more than eliminate targets, because they disrupt thought, timing, and trust in the environment. Shelter, water, and darkness no longer function as protection once the airspace belongs to the attacker. What emerges is a reversal of traditional assumptions, where hiding does not reduce danger and movement does not restore control. By the time this phase unfolds, the outcome is already set, because human reactions cannot outrun a system built to observe without pause. This is the point where the engagement stops being about platforms or routes, and becomes a lesson in how modern warfare turns exposure into certainty within moments. Besides small boats, the conflict expands once Ukraine applies the same logic of control to larger naval assets, because the objective is no longer limited to stopping movement, but to disrupt awareness across the entire maritime space. Along rivers and open sea lanes, Ukrainian forces deploy long-range UAVs and surface drones to apply pressure on Russian vessels that support command, intelligence, and coordination tasks. These vessels matter not simply because they carry weapons, but because they manage how information is collected, processed, and distributed during operations. In a notable Black Sea operation, Ukraine first sends drone decoys toward a clearly visible approach corridor, creating the impression of a direct incoming attack. Russian defenses respond according to standard procedure, as helicopters and escort units leave their assigned positions to intercept what appears to be the main threat. This response reduces protection elsewhere, because attention and assets shift toward the decoys and away from the actual objective area. Once the defensive layer is drawn out of position, a separate drone advances at very low altitude over the water, staying close to the surface to reduce the chance of early detection. Its movement is controlled and steady because success depends on timing rather than speed, and that timing follows the relocation of Russian patrol elements. The drone reaches the target area while attention remains focused elsewhere and strikes a vessel tasked with signal collection and surveillance coordination. The damage extends beyond the hull, as onboard electronic systems are disrupted at the same moment as the physical impact. Sensors that previously tracked activity and transmitted data stop functioning, and control consoles lose operational capability in ways that cannot be corrected during the engagement. The result is not just a single ship damaged, but a portion of the maritime awareness picture becoming unavailable. Without this node, nearby units struggle to share accurate information, and response times slow across the surrounding area. This loss of capability continues after the strike, because replacing equipment and restoring confidence in coverage requires time and careful revalidation. For Ukraine, the key outcome is the silence that follows the strike, rather than the visible destruction itself. With fewer effective sensors operating, Ukrainian UAVs gain greater freedom of movement, while Russian forces must assume the presence of blind spots even when none are clearly identified. This situation forces commanders into a defensive posture because they cannot be certain which signals are reliable and which movements are being observed. The engagement demonstrates that drones are now used to disrupt perception and coordination, not only to cause direct physical damage. By pulling defenses away with decoys and attacking from unexpected directions, Ukraine applies a layered approach that targets the overall system rather than individual platforms. Large ships that once relied on distance and escort protection face similar risks to small boats when situational awareness breaks down. The maritime environment offers limited warning because low-flying and surface-level drones blend into background noise until they are close. When detection occurs late, available response options shrink rapidly, and the cost of mistakes increases. Control at sea is no longer defined by constant presence, but by the ability to deny the opponent clear vision at critical moments. A brief loss of visibility can undo defensive measures built over many years. Ukraine's approach reflects a shift toward operations designed to disrupt coordination across wide areas instead of pursuing isolated targets. As these tactics spread, the balance at sea depends less on ship size and more on who can manage information under pressure. The overall pattern that emerges from recent operations is a shift toward warfare built around unmanned systems, where Ukraine focuses on constant pressure rather than isolated high-impact strikes. Alongside campaigns that rely on aerial UAVs for surveillance and attack, Ukraine has also developed separate operations centered on unmanned surface vehicles, treating them as a distinct tool rather than an extension of air-based drones. These surface drones are designed for missions where remaining close to the water offers tactical advantages, especially in areas where radar coverage is uneven and visual detection is limited by weather or sea conditions. Unlike UAVs that dominate the airspace, surface drones operate inside normal maritime traffic patterns, which allows them to approach targets without immediately triggering alarms. Their role is not to replace aerial systems, but to attack different vulnerabilities, particularly ships and vessels that support logistics, fuel transport, or regional maritime control. One recent attack involved the Sea Baby unmanned surface vehicle against the oil tanker Dnipro. In that operation, the surface drone was launched from a distance and navigated along a predictable maritime route, blending into normal background movement on the water. The tanker was not operating in a high-alert combat posture, because it was part of a logistics network rather than a frontline naval unit. As the drone closed in, it approached from the stern, an area that often receives less direct observation during routine sailing and offers structural vulnerabilities. The attack resulted in multiple explosions along the rear section of the vessel, causing serious damage and forcing the ship out of operation. This was not a symbolic strike, but a practical demonstration that surface drones could reach and damage large vessels without requiring air superiority or direct naval engagement. The significance of the incident goes beyond the damage to a single ship. Once such an attack occurs, similar vessels operating in the same region must assume they are also at risk, regardless of whether they are military or civilian linked. As a result, shipping routes connected to the conflict become more dangerous, and operators are forced to adjust behavior even when no immediate threat is visible. This leads to increased patrol requirements, expanded escort missions, and higher demands on naval and security resources. More assets are tied up protecting supply lines, while fewer remain available for other operational tasks. The cumulative effect is a steady reduction in flexibility rather than a sudden collapse of capability. Surface drone operations work because they do not require constant success to remain effective. Once credibility is established, the possibility of another attack is enough to influence decision-making and force defensive planning. From Ukraine's perspective, this approach is efficient because unmanned surface vehicles are cheaper and easier to produce than traditional naval platforms. The continuous use of UAVs and surface drones means there is no clear frontline at sea. Instead, maritime space becomes divided into areas of higher and lower risk that shift depending on activity, weather, and intelligence. Ships may operate for extended periods without incident, yet crews remain under constant stress, because the threat is unpredictable and difficult to detect early. In practical terms, this erosion appears as slower movement, more cautious routing, and reduced freedom of action across contested waters. Ukraine's advantage lies in recognizing that unmanned warfare is not about dramatic moments, but about sustained control over time. By treating UAV and surface drone operations as a long-term campaign rather than individual attacks, Ukraine increases the cost of defense for its opponent day by day. As this form of warfare continues to develop, its importance will only grow because control of information, movement, and pressure now matters as much as firepower in modern conflicts. It starts with a small boat disappearing on the water near Kherson, and it ends with large ships on the Black Sea no longer feeling safe, and that contrast tells the whole story of this conflict. Across rivers and open sea, the battlefield is shrinking under the constant gaze of UAVs, where distance no longer guarantees safety and movement no longer brings relief. Ukraine is not winning space with loud strikes or massive firepower, but with the ability to see first, decide faster, and strike at the moment when the opponent is most exposed. From FPV attacks on transport boats to surface drones hitting critical maritime targets, the pattern is clear, because this is not about single missions, but about sustained pressure that never fully goes away. UAV warfare may continue to escalate, or it may force both sides to rethink long-standing doctrines, yet the next phase is still uncertain. Will defenses evolve quickly enough to push back this constant surveillance, or will unmanned systems keep tightening control over rivers and sea lanes day by day? That uncertainty is exactly what makes the situation in Ukraine's maritime space one of the most important fronts to watch in the coming months. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit like if this breakdown helped you understand the battlefield better, share the video with others who follow military and geopolitical issues, and subscribe to Military Force for more clear and in-depth analysis like this.